Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center, Ukrinform. We continue our operation. My name is Olga Atamanova. It's almost 9 years of the war and almost a year of the full-scale invasion of Russian aggressor in our homeland. And now we've gathered here in commemoration of the Day of the Heroes of the Heavenly Hundred. We will discuss the condition of investigation and the prospects of justice. I want to introduce our speakers today. It's Alexei Donsky, representative of the Prosecutor General's Office, Artem Yablovsky, Deputy Head of State Bureau of Investigation for the cases of Maidan, Vitaly Muzika, State Bureau of Investigation, the Head of the First Department, Roman Lyashko, the Head of the Second Department of the State Bureau of Investigation. And joining us online is Alexandra Romantsova, Executive Director at the Center for Civil Liberties NGO. Miss Alexandra, are you with us? Yes, I'm with you. Good afternoon. And Igor Poshovailo, Director General at the National Memorial Complex of Heroes of the Heavenly Hundred, and Mrs. Tamara Shvets, a wife of a hero of a Heavenly Hundred, the head of the NGO, the Union of the Families of the Heroes of Heavenly Hundred. So let's start our discussion. It will last for around 1 hour. We will be talking about the progress in the cases of Maidan. We will hear the opinion of the representatives of civil organizations, their evaluation of the progress, or if there is any progress or otherwise. So Mr. Alexei, please take the microphone. Good afternoon. Am I heard well? Well, first of all, I would like to say that I will try to not to overload you with the figures. All the figures are available at the website of the Office of the Prosecutor General, and everybody who is curious about them, they can get familiarized in detail with the numbers, but I would like to draw your attention more to such key things which can be interesting to the society. So first of all, if we take the last year, the time that passed during the last report in the year 2022, we finished the proceedings on the murders in the Institutska Street regarding the 5 servicemen of the Special Operations Company of Berkut. The court was meeting in the negotiations room, and there was a discussion about the life sentence for them, and we expect for the fair justice for them. If we take the most tragic and the bloody events of the February 20, 2014, when in Institutska Street and near the Zhovtneve Palace, 48 persons were murdered and 85 more persons were injured. And if we take the level of organizers of the above crimes, as we reported previously, there is a pre-court investigation which is over regarding the heads of the government agencies. As per the events of the 18th of February, as to their countering violent oppression of the peaceful demonstrations. So in order not to repeat myself now, we received a court award for the restriction with the familiarization of the case materials for the convicts. So we hope that this investigation will be transferred to the court this year. There are more investigations which were over as to the top officials for the illegal import of Russian grenades, which resulted in injuries of many people back then. Since those people are hiding from investigation, the court proceedings will be going on without their presence. Also, in view of the events that are going on now, we can say that the same persons, at least part of those persons which were involved in the violent oppression of the protests, they play important role in the law enforcement bodies of Russian Federation. The note of suspicion is being handed to the head of Berkut unit of Sevastopol, who currently is a part of the occupational authorities in Crimea, and he was handed a note of suspicion for the murders on the 18th of February 2014, and we identified the facts of collaboration of that person with the occupational forces and assistance in occupation of peninsula of Crimea, and there is investigation underway in this regard. So in principle, the details of investigation, well, maybe in this regard there will be more questions to the representatives of State Bureau of Investigation. I will voice the court matters, and maybe something that I will not cover we will have questions in that regard. But as to the court proceedings, something that is interesting to everybody always, and now it is especially interest, is the matter of Russian trace in the Maidan events. We reiterated for a number of times that if we investigated in terms of performers of the crime, the servicemen of the special companies of Berkut, there are no Russian traces there, because they were getting orders from the Ukrainian law enforcement command along the chain of command. So the history of the war of Russia against Ukraine, it demonstrates where Russia can use Ukrainians to kill Ukrainians. They do it. They only get involved on the level of the law enforcement units when they have no other opportunities, when they cannot kill Ukrainians with the hands of Ukrainians. And in that case, they did not have to resort to such measures, as they had representatives of Ukrainian police and Ukrainian Berkut back then. But talking about the Russian trace as the way of influence on the government officials, as the beneficiaries of those violent actions against the protesters, you may see the Russian trace in those criminal cases against the top-level government officials and the heads of law enforcement agencies who organized the mass murders on 18th to 20th February. And the participation of Russia in the events of Maidan can be traced when there will be court proceedings in regard of our top-level government, of former top-level government officials. Even now, from the latest facts that we identified when we had debates over Berkut special unit, one of the indirect evidences that I wanted to voice, none of the servicemen of the special company of Berkut, they have no relation to either Donetsk or Luhansk. They are all from Kiev or like 3 of them are from Kiev and 2 were from Chernihiv. They never resided and never worked in either Donetsk or Luhansk regions. So there is a question why in that case so-called DPR and LPR, for them it was so important to get those servicemen from Berkut. It was so important that the lawyers said that they had to exchange them, and in case they would not have been exchanged, the exchange would not have happened anyway. So why those quasi-formations, and in fact Russian Federation needed them so bad that the exchange would not have happened without them? There is a convict in the events of the 18th of February, Shogolev, the head of security service, the Kiev Department of Security Service. That person worked in the Donetsk region for a number of years, more than 20 years, and he was serving back in KGB in Soviet era, and then in security service of Ukraine. And there was no question from Russian Federation or quasi-formations about that person. But for the mentioned 5 servicemen of the special company, that question was brought up. And I think it depends on the level of involvement in the scenarios that Russia was seeing for themselves for what should be happening in Ukraine. And yet another demonstrative experience is Mr. Medvedchuk, which makes a lot of statements now. We already emphasized previously that that person during the mass shootings of on the 20th February communicated a lot with the then president of Ukraine, Yanukovych. And before the 19th of February, he was in his mansion in Zakarpattia region. But there is a coincidence that on the 19th of February, he moves to Crimea with his family, and on the 20th of February, the events that we know about happened. And before the occupation of Crimea, Medvedchuk is in Crimea, and then he flies on the 26th of February, he flies to Geneva. And so he flies out of Crimea on the 26th, and on 27th of February, the invasion in Crimea begins. So I'm just telling you about some features that we have evidences about, and we will use them to demonstrate the system of facts which corroborate the influence of Russian Federation, the telephone contacts between the command of the law enforcement agencies. So they just corroborate the facts of collaboration in those mass murders events. So if previously it was segmented and it sounded during press conferences, but during court proceedings all those facts will be disclosed, and it will be obvious what was the role of the neighboring state in the bloodiest crimes in Maidan. And in brief about the court proceedings, we reiterated it previously. I'm taking the prosecutor's office. 29 persons are convicted for the time being, and about 20 persons are exempt due to the expiration of the terms of cases. But I will reiterate it again. Our main problem is the lack of balance between a number of convictions in the courts and number of cases convicted and number of awards, number of actual convictions. And if for a small number of cases we can talk about the objective difficulties, that they should be reviewed objectively for a long period due to a big number of participants. For example, the case of murders in Institutska Street, there were periodic meetings of the courts with no distortions, but there is a large number of cases that cannot be, for which their lengthy consideration cannot be justified. I will give you just a couple of figures for understanding of the level of problems. For example, the preparation proceedings. During these proceedings, there is no conviction for the persons, and it just considers the level of involvement. So this case is lasting for 6 years, another one is for 4 years, yet another one for 2 years. So there are preparation procedures which do not study any evidences. It's just that they consider either the participants may or may not be convicted in further proceedings, and there are more than 10 proceedings which last for more than 1 year, and we have 165 cases considered in general and or criminal proceedings, and 126 cases. So those are the figures, and those are the reasons why a large fraction of cases end with exemption, with no rehabilitating reasons. And if we see the pre-court proceedings, even more significant figures are there. For example, we have 10 proceedings which last for more than 7 years. In 17 proceedings, more than 6 years. In 13 proceedings, more than 5 years. And as I mentioned before, and I keep reiterating it, it's not the problem. Well, there is a problem with judges and defenders and the prosecutors, but there is a legislative issue. And the problem is that our legislation allows suspension of such process as an element of an advocate's tactics, very beneficial tactics, advantageous tactics. And an example I can give you, so if we take our department and the previous units, in Maidan cases, there is no single justification, a word which would take effect. From the point of view of the prosecutor's office, there was one case which was cancelled. So the case was re-forwarded and it will be reconsidered. So due to the fact that the advocates cannot get the justification award, they use these suspension tactics to extend the process in time the most possible. And I think that the solution will be the amendments to the legislation, and we expect the civil society to support us and journalists as well, so that this draft legislation that we helped develop, those are the amendments which will close the loopholes for the abuse of the proceedings and procedures. So why can't we define the terms of proceedings for the preparation proceedings, which we are convinced of? I don't want to go very profoundly into the details. What should be done, in our opinion, to give those cases the chance not to stay in the courts for such long periods is, we understand that for the very heavy crimes, we only have 1 year left to get the guilty ones convicted. We have to do everything possible to get them convicted. As to some positive features, I want to say that the first conviction without the presence of the guilty party the law enforcement serviceman was convicted to 8 years. However, there was another case considered in the regular procedure. So the term of 8 years is the longest term, and there are also cases with the big terms against the civil individuals who, the so-called titushkas, who cooperated with police for the kidnapping of the protesters in January and the attack on journalist Veremi on the 18th of February. So in principle, we can say about certain achievements. You can get familiarized with the figures in more detail in the website of the Office of Prosecutor General. Well, my report took a lot of time actually, so I invite Mr. Artem to talk about the work of the State Bureau of Investigation. Thank you. Today is the 3rd anniversary of creation of our department in the Bureau. We have 80 conviction cases which were forwarded to the courts. 6 persons were detained and 50 more persons were handed the notice of suspicion, and we had 58 conviction acts in regard of the 64 persons. The most demonstrative are the cases against the Major General of KGB and Deputy Head of the NSDC, who organized the counteraction to the student Maidan, who was awarded the rank of Major General, and in a couple of months he organized the counteraction to the first action of protests. Here we're seeing the Russian trace. He is hiding in Russia now. He was serving in the law enforcement agencies of Soviet Union. Also, there is a case against the then Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, who is convicted in organization of mass shootings, the import of grenades from Russia for counteraction of the protests. With the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation against Ukraine, he called to the head of one of the military administrations to surrender the city. So there is an investigation on the high treason, and also there are investigations forwarded to Office of Prosecutor General in regard of the special company Berkut, and there is a potential suspicion of high treason and participation in terroristic organization. Also, another commander of the Berkut unit was handed the notice of suspicion and invited for interrogation. So we investigate the influence of Russia to the participation of Russia in the counteraction of the protests, and also the fact that all the suspects are hiding in Russia. It also is an evidence of Russian trace. And even before when we had diplomatic relations with Russia, there were diplomatic requests to hand all those suspects to Ukraine, and they responded that it violates the legal procedures of Russian Federation, and those who imported illegally the grenades from Russia to Ukraine, they were convicted in the illegal customs clearance. Also for the counteraction of the protests on the 18th of February, there were notice of suspicion given to the two heads of the units of the protection of civil security. They were convicted in dissemination of combat cartridges and organization of beating of the journalists. There was also a note handed to the head of the Department of the Automobile Safety, Road Safety Police, and the organizers of beating in the streets of Shores, Grushevsky Street and Kripasny Lane were also handed notice of suspicion. There was more content for our cases in search of assets around the world which belong to the convicts, which assets may be enforced in favor of Ukraine, and the court satisfied request from the Ministry of Justice to enforce the assets of former President Yanukovych. Also, the same procedure was applied in regard of former Minister Zakharchenko in amount of 1,240,000,000 hryvnias. Thank you. If there are more questions, I will answer all the questions, and I will pass the microphone to the head of the second department, who is responsible for investigation of the violent crimes against the protesters. I can only say that all the investigators of the first department are involved in the investigations to finish the investigation of crimes which were committed during the Revolution of Dignity. As of 2023, the investigators prepared materials that we are ready to forward to the court for the convictions. First of all, in relation of the commander of the Berkut company, who directly commanded the company during the 20th February 2014, right after the conviction is forwarded to the court, we will proceed to the special pre-court investigation in regard of his of the personnel of the company who are currently staying in aggressor country. They received the citizenship from aggressor, so we have to resort to the special procedure. And apart from that, we will take the most efforts possible to identify the direct perpetrators of the crimes, the first murders on Maidan in relation of Sergei Nikoyan and Mikhailo Zhizhnevsky, and those who were participating in the so-called anti-terroristic operation 18th to 20th of February. If anybody has any questions, please ask your questions. I'm ready to respond them. Mr. Roman, if you have anything to add, thank you. The second department is specialized in the illegal decisions taken by the law enforcement agencies and judges. We have real problem here in the quick expiration of the terms of investigation, and it requires activization from us and cooperation with the relevant department of the Office of Prosecutor General to have all the proceedings that are currently underway to properly assess the actions of the perpetrators and to have all those cases forwarded to the court. So we have to sort out this issue in the fastest manner possible. So more than 20 cases were forwarded to the court, and that's why 10 years, year 2024, is the time when the terms will expire for the heavy crimes, and the Prosecutor's General Office is aimed at resolution of this issue to the maximum extent. Thank you for your attention. Mr. Mara, do you have anything to add? It's a personal tragedy for you. What's your evaluation of the progress? What's your evaluation of all the work done? Lately, I'm seeing the progress in this regard. Unfortunately, we don't have sufficient support in the courts. Unfortunately, the case of my husband is considered here. General Shchegolev was mentioned, the head of Kiev Department of State Security Service of Ukraine. It's an insolent, it's the strictly insolent person. In the very first proceedings, he said that he was hunting people near this House of Unions. So we have to understand that we have human hunters here. We have to clearly understand that what depends on us is the court proceedings and the awards. The more we go there, the quicker those cases will move. Am I right? Yes, you are right. From the very first days when I started attending court proceedings, Mr. Alexei, well, all these people present here are young ones. The new ones, Mr. Alexei knew how I was asking both prosecutors and the judges. It all depends on us. The civil society supports us. The draft law on the investigation without the direct participants, it helped us move some very significant cases. And today, very important moment, we were attending a meeting with Stefanchuk recently. We have to get involved and we have to assist in extension of the investigation cases. Thanks everybody who gets involved. Thanks everybody who participates in Maidan cases. We all have to understand Maidan is not yet over. They were the first representatives of Russian mercenaries in Maidan. They are not shown anywhere, but those who were present were here in Russian language. It's different from others. Well, I mean, in terms of pronunciation, Russia was our most terrible enemy and they remain our most terrible enemy today, but we will take over because the spirit of Maidan can only be described in words, but you have to feel it. You have to be in the field there. Among us, there are very active participants of Maidan who don't miss a single session. It would be good to have the civil community involved to the proceedings, at least online. Thank you that I may address all Ukrainians today, and maybe not only Ukrainians, to those who are Ukrainians at heart. Today, the whole world, they found out who are Ukrainians during Maidan, but now they understand what is the eradication of nation, and they started concerning about their nations as well. Joining us online is Miss Alexandra. Miss Alexandra, are you with us? We can't hear you. Oh, yes, I'm with you. Miss Alexandra, we've heard about a lot of problems, about a lot of progress in the cases, but we've heard about the problems faced by the law enforcement personnel, what Mr. Mara just mentioned about the fact that the cases are being suspended in the courts. As a representative of civil organization, is there any way we can influence on the progress to have the court awards emerge in a more rapid manner. It's not only that we may, but we are obliged to do so. There is a task in front of us as the Ukrainian society, the justice not only for the crimes which happened before the 24th of February, but there are thousands of cases that Russian Federation brought as the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and even the elements of genocide, and specifically the cases of Maidan are a very significant indicator of how our court system is capable of coping with such challenges. The Maidan cases are important not only for the relatives and people who were affected during the protests from December to February, from December 13th to February 14th. Those are socially significant cases. Now we're seeing, as it was properly mentioned by our colleagues from Prosecutor General's office, there is certain sabotage. Well, I'm talking about, I'm saying, I'm using the term sabotage, not our colleagues from the Prosecutor's office, but there are elements of the procedures which allow suspension or lengthening of the process, which border on some fraud practices, because in some situations the judges are unable to properly organize the procedures. And can you imagine, it's been 8 years of proceedings, more than 600 proceedings, and 200 of them were rescheduled, and it's the responsibility of court administration to organize the process properly, and it's a significant process, and it should be happening without such technical legislative obstacles, which are a mean of lengthening the process and a means to achieve the result without such things as expiration of the term of responsibility, term of liability. And you know, there are advocates who represent the affected side, but there are also advocates who represent the guilty party, and they use those fraudulent methods, and those bodies who should evaluate the image and the reputation of the people, unfortunately, they extend the terms, they create the obstacles to make sure that justice does not happen. And here we're having a system of justice which does not bring justice, and some of the relatives are not even alive. They didn't make it to hear the just award from the court, and unfortunately there are already 2 persons among the relatives of those who perished in Maidan. And as a civil organization, we received 16,000 calls, and the majority of them were in regard of the violation of human rights in Maidan. So currently is the first exam of Ukrainian justice before they start investigating the war crimes, war against humanity and crimes of genocide that were committed by Russian Federation now. So the attention of the civil community is to come to the court, to ask a question from the journalists what's going on there, so that the journalists are motivated to come to the proceedings and to cover the events. Even if you come there and the session was postponed, it means that the most inadequate thing is the reason for rescheduling the session, because they should investigate what's behind that. The fair justice should be going on there. It's our responsibility to do it, to bring justice, and even for those who are not with us currently, but for the relatives of all of those who are still there, because those people who perished there, they gave us this possibility to fight for our independence, to repel the aggression. So we have to get included in this process. Us as a civil organization, we have proper mechanisms that everybody can get involved, and this human rights protection group Ozone, we have members sent to such sessions, and we will continue doing it. So we invite everybody, we call everybody, we will teach you how to do it. Be the guide for justice for the society. Come to us and support during all sessions, and I hope that we will make it not to pass those terms. We only have 1 year to have those people who were given orders, who brought the law enforcement personnel, breaking their function, they transforming their function from protection to giving orders to offensive. They have to be brought to liability. Thank you, Ms. Alexandra. What you said is very important. I think we all should remember that. I want to emphasize once again that we can pay our debt to those people who are heroes and to become active in our society, to take part in those investigations which are utmostly important for the justice to happen. Microphone, please. Microphone. If I may correct it, 29 relatives already died with no award. Even there are young wives under 40 years who were not able to resist the psychological pressure. And many participants of Maidan are dying of chemical poisoning which were not recognized so far. So we have to be prepared, and we have to understand what's chemical poisoning. I have a question. I cannot be present all the time, and to see the people who were submitting to the Hague Tribunal. Can anybody answer me about the progress in the Hague? Can anybody give any comments on that? The only thing I can say is that there was a question about the International Criminal Court to consider the cases, but there is the alternative subjectivity. The cases have to comply with the criteria, and to have the ICC take cases, there was a communication between the representatives of ICC and us, and if ICC takes a part of those cases for consideration, they cannot be considered in Ukraine anymore. And in terms of procedures, there are a problem in this regard. This is why there was a communication with ICC. They've seen the cases, but for the time being, they do not investigate the cases. You are the first person to tell us this. Well, I can give you a couple of comments on this. We were the first organization who submitted to the International Criminal Court before the Ukrainian government started doing it. We passed all the information through our hotline together with the British lawyers. They accepted it from us as an NGO, and then from the government of Ukraine they had a different application, and the International Prosecutor's Office, the award of the ICC was such that there is no systemic nature, and the attacks of the peaceful protests were happening not only in Kiev but all around Ukraine. So they were not able to recognize it as the international crime against humanity, but at the same time Ukraine doesn't have such thing as the international crime against humanity in its legislation. So if there would be international crime, there would be no expiration term for liability for it. And if we make it within 1 year, and they will not expire, probably such risk would be less. Thank you, Ms. Alexandra. We have another liability or responsibility and obligation in front of our heroes to remember them on the state level. There was a resolution of the memorial of the heroes of Heavenly Hundred. Mr. Igor, the word to you. There is problem about that. We understand that the court proceedings are still underway and the investigation is underway. So what's the problem about that? Thank you. Really, together with the civil initiatives, civil organizations, we initiate such discussions, such meetings, and we are really concerned with the condition. We're seeing certain statistics, some progress, but we don't have right in the principal thing that the question that our visitors ask us: are the guilty ones punished? And Mr. Alexei is the public person, and we really appreciate for all the information given to us. And the exposition cases of Maidan is traditionally open in the alley of the Heavenly Hundred. But we want to the attention of the society not to fade. And Mr. Donsky mentioned in one interview about the final result, about the court system, that they should be disciplined. And I will have a question, if you may answer it: how real it is? Is there a mechanism apart from the amendment of the criminal code? We will be hearing traditional questions from our traditional participants, because we vent out emotions. We are concerned. There are no people who are indifferent to this subject, but the judges signed the search orders quickly, and we see that there are some unreasonable questions behind that, like the deprivation of documents, or the judges find ways and to extend, to lengthen the procedure, and it's difficult to close even half of them, about 70. And starting from such elementary things: who were guilty, who is punished, we have to build our narratives based on the results of the investigation, on the court awards, and ending with the arrest and the territory blocking of our conditions, arrest of accounts, and the criminal proceedings. That's the problem. So availing myself of opportunity, and I would like our participants to be able to ask those questions too, that we discussed a lot of times in the office of Prosecutor General with Sergei Gorbatyuk back then. As to the application of new methods, we were talking about the movement to European Union. We're switching to different level, maybe a different level of investigation too. So with the count of current situation, how many new criminal cases are or new investigations are being opened by the Office of Prosecutor General with regard to the crimes committed by Russia, for example, today? Are there any new methods, for example, 3D models, or for example, in this case with the expiration periods, can we do the investigation experiments in the memorial, or maybe some elements, some traces just disappear in a natural way? And I would like to call that I would like to promote that all our meetings, our sessions like this end up with proper cooperation. But are there any simple steps that we can take in order to prevent all this cancellation of the criminal cases due to the expiration of liability and sabotage from judges or from the defenders of the guilty parties. So that some may ask questions, I will answer in brief. The steps are very simple. If we talk about legislative amendments, we use the instruments that we used to have. There were complaints to the Constitutional Court of Ukraine, and the some of the complaints were not even considered due to the absence of the disciplinary body in the structure. They did not consider a number of cases. So I will tell you some elementary thing. If a court, due to any reasons, if a case is being extended and there is only 1 year left, so we offer to make amendment to the legislation. If there is 1 year left to the expiration, the court should appoint the consideration of case like twice a week. There should be more active consideration. It's no difficult. This proposal can change the situation already now. I see no problem about this. I don't see any pressure on the court in this regard. There should be priority, obviously, for those cases where the liability period expires. And as to the other questions of yours, obviously, such technical possibilities that we have, including 3D modeling, they are used to the maximum extent in the cases of Maidan. And as to the nature, some activities, for example, in case of Berkut, even before the exchange, they were providing evidences to us. And those who came back, they only provided evidence. They were interrogated as they were coming back. So and the same situation is with other whose activities are being investigated. So it's not about 3D modeling here, but to move forward with this memorial, we have to have at least one award which would take effect, and we would use the facts from that award as something corroborated by court. But 3D modeling would not replace those investigation actions. They would not be a replacement for the evidences provided by the witnesses. We have many journalists in the studio. Alexander Demoshenko, the representative of civil organization in Resilient Maidan. I will read you an excerpt. The European Court on Human Rights made an award on certain cases of violation of human rights during Maidan, specifically as for torturing, right to safety and right to gathering and respect to personal life, and made a conclusion that the then Ukrainian authorities used illegal force and that the state is responsible for that. I have to understand the authorities changed already, but the responsibility is not being borne. No one is being brought liable, so no one is liable for the time being. Can you please give us a couple of comments on this? Mr. Alexander, just in brief, the representatives of authorities of the government, starting with the top-level government officials and ending with the top-level law enforcement command, they are all brought to liability, and the award you're referring to, we use it as one of the evidences in all of our proceedings. Any more comments and questions? Alla Shershin, Ukrinform. I have a question to Mr. Alexei. You mentioned that the terms of liability expire in the majority of cases. Can you give us the exact figure, and how can we change the situation? Are there any draft laws in the Parliament. Well, very briefly, as I mentioned today, if we put away the cases which were awarded already, I mean there are 134 cases, 134 proceedings, and the terms expire. I'm talking about the heavy crimes, and if a person is hiding, there is no expiration term, and for the extremely heavy cases. But for 22 cases, the terms expire in November, December this year, and January, December next year is 27 cases. What can be done? I mentioned already. Don't count on the good advocate or judge or the prosecutor. There should be amendments to legislation. It's not about our office or State Bureau of Investigation. We don't require any additional authorities. I've just mentioned it. For these 60 cases, for example, we see where the terms expire, so we should have the sessions twice a week and allocate not half an hour for them. Even given the air raid alert, the session may be suspended during the air raid alert, but it should be ended after the alert is cancelled. So we should amend the legislation. And some details about the draft law. Is there any draft law? Yes, about the draft law. The first draft law we initiated, 6454. It was adopted in the first reading before the war, and on the 22nd of February the Parliament adopted it. However, it has a lot of provisions that were not adopted, those that we insisted on, and we were expecting them to be adopted in the second reading, but there was no work on this legislation this year. I don't know to what extent we can come back to the previous draft, but we count on the support of the civil society to have the Parliament adopt that draft. And one of the specific things that I already mentioned, there are more mechanisms that would allow us to come to the logical conclusion. In those cases, I have another questions to the investigators, to the State Bureau of Investigation. Are there any chances to find those guilty in the murder of Sergei Nigayan? We focus, as I mentioned, to identify the direct perpetrators of the first victim of Maidan murder, Sergei Nigayan. Well, provided that during the investigation there was a number of examinations that contradict one to another, but in the view of the time passing, we count a lot that we will be able to identify the direct perpetrator of the murder of Sergei Nigayan. Thank you. Well, I would like to understand the society to understand that there is no expiration term for the murder. Well, I want to add to the answer of Mr. Alexei. Last year, during the day of commemoration of the Heavenly 100, there was a meeting of the families, and the Prosecutor's office is with us. The participants of Maidan were with us. We had a meeting with Stefan Chuk, and there were representatives of the departments, the representatives of the ministries, and thanks to the fact that we brought up that issue, it was voted in the first reading. It was adopted in the first reading, but the latest events kind of disrupted our cooperation with the people's deputies. We have some statements from on the floor. Please take the microphone because we have simultaneous translation here. Микола Підгузько, I have to ask the following question. In this collective we're gathering not for the first time, not the first year. So look, there is a court branch of our authority. It does not report to the society. It does not the judicial power does not report in front of the executive or legislative power, and they bear no liability for anything. For example, the Solomiansky District Court. You're telling about sessions twice a week. We cannot do anything for like 3 months. I asked them, when did you receive the documents from the Court of Appeal? They say, we did not. So on the 1st of March, we will have another session finally. We cannot move it from the dead point. How many years have passed? All the courts of Kiev, we went all around them. I understand that this is the rhetoric question. It should be addressed with the government. Well, and I want to add the judge that was mentioned. He showed me a stack of cases that he was tasked with by the municipal court. And when we asked him about the cases he should consider, he asked, okay, so which cases I should not consider? So how can I give priority to these loud cases, to these big cases? We have another question, maybe 1 or 2, and unfortunately the time expires. May I not stand up? Dear community, I represent this civil organization that the representatives of Maidan, Resilient Maidan 1802. So the condition of consideration of cases of the 18th of February is quite catastrophic. Not horrible, but catastrophic. Because we are the participants of 4 different cases, and we were taking part in more than 600 cases. 200 of them were disrupted by the representatives of Berkut. So Podil District Court, the company commander, Captain Shapoval of Kharkiv Berkut, we were hoping that he will get convicted, and it will be the foundation for conviction of Kharkiv and Lviv battalions of Berkut. But what happened after the 6 years? 6 years were wasted, because after 6 years the judge resigned and the case returned to the 0 point. And Captain Shapovalov just got on his car or on a plane and he left Ukraine. He was there, he was in Ukraine on that very day, but he found out that he was about to be convicted and he easily left Ukraine. And there is another case related to 18th of February, Svetoshin District Court. The Lieutenant Colonel Potselyak, the commander of Lviv Berkut, he was studying in Omsk in Russia, and he was hiding in Russia, and he swore allegiance to Russia, and his term expires after 10 years, and yet before the full-scale invasion he was telling to our brothers that we will convict you soon. So they mock us. There is no end seen even in a number of years. Even if the expiration is 15 years, the judge is on the side of those to be convicted. And they call us unbeaten participants of Maidan. Unbeaten. participants of Maidan. And there was a case in Голосіївський district court, which was transferred to Солом'янський district court. 180 days the session was postponed for only preparation session. And what are the reasons they don't start the session? Because the judges don't know if all those affected ones were properly informed, and we don't know if they've shown up, because half of them already died, part of them are in the front lines, part of them became disabled, they cannot show up. So it's a sacrilege, it's a blasphemy when they said that Katerina Shapoval did not show up due to some reasons. Timoshenko shows the picture from the cemetery. She died, and the judge says, I will evict you from the courtroom for the lack of regard to the court. And Shapoval was meeting airplanes from Russia which were bringing grenades and the arms which were prohibited to be used in Ukraine. And this very person, Spassky, he was disseminating those arms and ammunition to the commanders of Kharkiv and Lviv Berkut companies. And we will state that the court system of Ukraine is the threat to the national security. If there are no radical changes, if there are no drastic changes, we will lose this war inside of our country. And we see that our country cannot do, our government cannot do anything against the judges. What's happening in relation to the judges, those reforms which are being done at the cost, at the expenses of European Union and American taxpayers, they are inefficient, they are mockery, and we will apply to the Embassy of the United States of Ukraine and the Embassy or Office of European Union. Maybe they can influence something that they pay for. Please understand that there is a war going on. We could be talking about this year ago, 3 years ago, but now the best sons and daughters of Ukraine are perishing in the front lines, and we keep chattering here. Just like our great man said, the political prisoner, prorector of Catholic University of Lviv, Miroslav Marinovich, we will win the war with a lot of blood, but if we don't change the situation inside the country, the victory will turn into inglorious loss. But unfortunately, this is where everything is going to, and the rotten judicial system, the mafia, is what pushes Ukraine to the loss. And we were suffering those tormenting by all the courts of Kiev. 87 judges were tormenting us, and only 2 of them are noble enough to have to be dressed as judges, because other ones are the enemies of Ukraine, and they should be investigated by State Bureau of Investigation, by Security Service of Ukraine, whether they work for the aggressor, whether they have the passports of Russian Federation. I apologize for the emotions, but I want Mr. Donsky to say what's going on. Oh yeah, and there is a Lukash case, the commander of battalion, which is in Darnetsky district court. Their judge is on the side of the truth and justice, but other courts are the horror. And I am personally afraid that those cases will just fall apart in the courts. Please, Mr. Alexei, in brief, Shapoval, there will be the procedure of special proceedings initiated in his regard as to the case that you mentioned, as to Patselyak and Lukash. In the narrow circle, we used to say about the procedural opportunities and plans that we count on, and obviously, yeah, and it's also related to Spassky. I completely share your outrage with regard to those cases, because the same situations are being considered by different courts. I was talking about the preparation session today. We had an opposite case about the 19 road police servicemen, and it was lasting for 5 years. The sessions were postponed, and I don't know which tactics is more threatening, either to have 19 cases in one proceeding, which technically allows them to suspend the process, and the last statement, law control. Could you please tell us why there is no response to who killed people in Maidan? Well, it's an interesting question. Have you been attending at least one session during the Berkut regarding the Berkut companies? In the statements of the prosecutor's office, you will hear the response from the court very shortly. Well, unfortunately, I have one statement. I have one statement as to the memorial in Institutska Street. Recently, there was commemoration of the memory of Nigoyan and Zhizhnevsky and those who died in January. There is a hole in the sidewalk. If we destroy the cobblestone which is now there, there will be a hole in all the Institutska Street. I'm against the restoration of the layer. We cannot touch it. It will be the destruction of the historical memory. Has everybody heard it? I will be categorically against it, and I have supporters. Thank you for your comment. Dear friends, during these discussions we've seen how many problems are still here, how much blame on our judicial system is still there. So it's a question to you, dear journalists, and hope is on you that thanks to your work there will be a progress in all those cases. I want to thank everybody. We have to wrap up this broadcast. Thank you for staying with us. Stay with us, trust in our armed forces, and work together for the victory and glory to Ukraine.
Та яка різниця?
Ви ж мені інтерв'ю брали, давали, ні?
Так а що ви зараз сказали?
Якщо журналіст не їде на